I stood in the pouring rain, staring at the blazing wreckage of my old life. Gabriel Russo, the most feared man in Phoenix, once looked at my soft, plus-sized body and sneered, "You mean nothing to me." Tonight, I'm gone. And tomorrow, I is going to burn this entire city to ash just trying to find me. The Gold Coast of Phoenix is a place where money screams and sins are buried under imported Italian marble. For 3 years, it was my prison. My name is Elizabeth Gallagher, or at least it was, until the ink dried on a contract that turned me into Elizabeth Russo. I was the eldest daughter of the Irish syndicate, handed over to the boss of the Italian mafia to stop a blood feud that had claimed 60 lives. I was a peace treaty with a pulse. And in the eyes of my new husband, Gabriel Russo, I was a tragic disappointment. In a world where mafia wives were manufactured to look like runway models, starved, nipped, tucked, and molded into size 0 perfection, I was the glaring exception. I am fat. I have thick thighs, a soft stomach, and curves that couldn't be hidden behind designer silk. I never hated my body. It was soft, it was mine, and it carried me through a childhood of surviving monsters. But in Gabriel's world, my weight was treated as a moral failing. Gabriel was a man carved from ice and violence. At 32, he ruled the Phoenix underworld with a merciless grip. He was terrifyingly handsome, but his eyes were entirely dead. When we stood at the altar, he didn't even look at me. When he slipped the 2-carat diamond on my finger, his grip was so tight it bruised. For 3 years, we lived in the same sprawling estate, living entirely separate lives. He had his businesses, his blood, and his string of impossibly thin, glamorous mistresses. I had my books, the estate's garden, and the agonizingly quiet role of the embarrassing wife. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday in late October. Gabriel was hosting a massive charity gala at our estate, a front to launder money with local politicians, including Senator Arthur Mitchell. I was expected to attend, to smile, and to prove the Irish-Italian alliance was thriving. I wore a custom emerald green gown that draped elegantly over my figure. For a brief, fleeting moment in the mirror, I felt beautiful. That illusion shattered the moment I stepped into the ballroom. Gabriel was standing by the bar, surrounded by his inner circle, including his ruthless underboss, Lorenzo Costa. Leaning against Gabriel's chest was Camilla Rossi, a local socialite with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. As I approached to stand by my husband's side for the obligatory photos, Camilla looked me up and down. She didn't bother lowering her voice. "Dom, darling," she purred, taking a sip of her champagne. "Are you sure she shouldn't be in the kitchen with the rest of the staff? Or did she already eat the appetizers?" A few of the men chuckled. I froze, the heat rushing to my cheeks. I looked at Gabriel, waiting for him to defend me. He was my husband. I bore his name. By the laws of our world, disrespecting me was disrespecting him. But Gabriel didn't reprimand her. He didn't even look angry. He just looked at me with profound, exhausting indifference. "Go upstairs, Elizabeth," he ordered, his voice flat. "You're making a scene." "I haven't said a word," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Your presence is a scene," he replied coldly. Later that night, long after the guests had left, and the house was drowning in silence, I found him in his private study. He was pouring a glass of scotch, his tuxedo tie undone. "Why did you even agree to marry me if you can't stand the sight of me?" I asked from the doorway, my hands clutching the fabric of my dress. He didn't look up from his glass. "It was business, Elizabeth." "I am a human being, Gabriel. I am your wife." He finally turned, his dark eyes flashing with irritation. He walked slowly across the Persian rug until he was inches from my face. The scent of scotch and gunpowder rolled off him. "Let's get one thing straight," Gabriel sneered, his voice dropping to a vicious, cruel whisper. "You are a contract. You are a bargaining chip that keeps your drunken father from shooting up my warehouses. Don't stand there and demand affection. You don't own my heart. You don't own my time. You mean absolutely nothing to me." He walked past me, bumping my shoulder so hard I stumbled. I stood in the cold study for hours. I didn't cry. The tears simply refused to fall. Instead, deep inside my chest snapped. A cold, terrifying clarity washed over me. He was right. I meant nothing to him. But what Gabriel didn't know was that while I was the invisible, fat wife, I was also the only person who knew how to truly destroy him. Because for the last 3 years, out of pure boredom, I had been the one fixing the accounting errors in his private ledgers. I knew every account, every bribe, every dirty cop, and every weakness in his empire. I meant nothing to him. So I decided to give him exactly what he wanted. Nothing. Leaving a mafia boss isn't like filing for divorce. It's signing your own death warrant. If I just ran, Gabriel would hunt me down out of pure pride, and my father would drag me back by my hair to keep the peace. I needed to disappear entirely. I needed them to think I was a ghost. I spent the next 4 weeks planning. My invisibility became my greatest weapon. The guards at the estate barely looked twice when I started taking solitary walks into the city. They assumed I was going to bakeries or dress shops. In reality, I was meeting with a discreet forger in the back room of a dingy laundromat. I liquidated the private, untraceable trust fund my late mother had left me. I bought a new identity, Clara Hayes. The perfect opportunity arrived on the night of November 14th. A rival Russian faction had moved in on the South Side docks. Gabriel and his entire crew, including Lorenzo, were mobilizing for an all-out war. The estate was in chaos. Men were loading automatic weapons into the trunks of black SUVs. The air was thick with tension and adrenaline. Gabriel was in the foyer, strapping a holster over his shoulders. He didn't even glance at me as I stood at the top of the stairs. "Lock the doors," he barked at the remaining guards. "If anyone who isn't us steps onto this property, shoot to kill." The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him. The moment his taillights faded into the night, I moved. I didn't pack a suitcase. A suitcase would show intent. I wore comfortable, dark clothes, a heavy coat, and sensible boots. I went into Gabriel's study one last time. I opened the hidden floor safe, the one he thought I didn't know the combination to, and pulled out the master ledger. The physical book that held the lifeblood of the Russo family. I didn't take it to ruin him. I took it as insurance. I left a single item on his immaculate mahogany desk, my platinum wedding ring, resting perfectly in the center of the leather blotting pad. Getting off the property was violently easy. The guards were focused outward, watching the perimeter for Russian hitmen. Nobody was watching the inside. I slipped through the kitchen, out the pantry delivery door, and vanished into the tree line bordering the estate. A hired cab was waiting for me 2 miles down the highway. By dawn, Clara Hayes was boarding a Greyhound bus to a small, freezing coastal town in Maine. Elizabeth Russo was dead. It took Gabriel exactly 18 hours to realize I was missing. According to the news reports I watched on a static-filled motel TV 3 days later, the dock war had been a bloody victory for the Italians. Gabriel had won. He returned to the estate exhausted, blood on his hands, expecting to find his quiet, invisible wife knitting or reading in the corner, fading into the wallpaper. Instead, he found the ring. I later learned the details from a burner phone conversation I risked having with Maria, a sympathetic maid at the estate. When Gabriel saw the ring, he didn't just get angry. He shattered. He tore the study apart. Maria had whispered, her voice trembling through the receiver. Mr. Russo threw the antique globe through the window. He ripped the bookshelves down with his bare hands. When he realized the master ledger was gone, we thought he was going to kill us all. He dragged the head of security into the driveway and beat him until Lorenzo had to pull him off. Gabriel thought I had been kidnapped by the Russians. He couldn't fathom that I had the intelligence or the courage to leave him. For the next week, the city of Phoenix bled. Gabriel tore through the criminal underworld like a starving wolf. He raided Russian safe houses, burning them to the ground. He dragged rival bosses into his basement, torturing them for information about his wife. When the Russians swore they didn't have me, he turned on my family. He kicked down the doors of the Irish syndicate, putting a gun to my own father's head, demanding to know where he had hidden his daughter. "I don't know," my father had begged. Gabriel's empire was crumbling. Without the ledger, his money laundering fronts stalled. Senator Mitchell panicked and cut ties. The police, pressured by the sudden spike in violence, started breathing down the Russo family's neck. But it wasn't just the business. It was his pride. It was his sanity. Maria told me that Gabriel had stopped sleeping. He stopped changing his clothes. The man who cared so deeply about appearances was unraveling. He spent hours sitting in my empty bedroom, surrounded by the dresses I had left behind, staring at the indentation on my side of the bed. He had fired Camilla the day after I left, nearly throwing her down the front steps when she tried to comfort him. He realized, too late, that the quiet, soft-spoken woman he had mocked was the only thing holding the fractured pieces of his life together. I was the one who remembered his mother's death anniversary. I was the one who smoothed over his harsh edges with the staff. I was the one who kept his ledgers clean. I had given him exactly what he asked for. I made sure I meant nothing to him by taking away everything. But my peace in Maine wouldn't last forever. I knew Gabriel. He was a predator, and a predator never stops hunting. The coastal town of Camden, Maine, smelled of salt, pine needles, and impending snow. It was a universe away from the blood-stained marble of Phoenix, and for the first time in my 26 years, I could breathe. I was no longer Elizabeth Russo, the invisible fat wife of a mobster. I was Clara Hayes. I had rented a small, drafty cottage overlooking the harbor, and taken a job at a local bakery run by an older, fiercely protective widow named Martha. In Camden, my body wasn't a political embarrassment. It was just a body. I spent my mornings covered in flour, kneading dough, and surrounded by the warmth of the industrial ovens. I ate fresh pastries without a voice in my head telling me to count the calories. I bought thick, knitted sweaters that hugged my soft curves, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the disappointment that used to reflect in Gabriel's eyes. I saw a woman who had survived. There was a local carpenter who came in every morning for black coffee and a cherry Danish. His name was Wyatt. He was tall, with kind, crinkled eyes and hands rough from honest labor. Unlike the men in Gabriel's inner circle who looked right through me, Wyatt looked at me. He noticed when I changed my hair. He brought me extra firewood when the temperatures plummeted. He appreciated the softness of my figure, often blushing when his hand accidentally brushed mine over the pastry counter. It was innocent, gentle, and utterly foreign to me. But a ghost can only haunt the living for so long before the living decide to perform an exorcism. Back in Phoenix, Gabriel was unraveling. The information I gleaned from the burner phone told a terrifying story. Maria, before she threw her phone into the Phoenix River for her own safety, informed me that Gabriel had become unrecognizable. The immaculate, ice-cold boss was gone. In his place was a violent, erratic phantom. He had alienated his underboss, Lorenzo Costa, by nearly shooting him during a paranoid fit. He had completely severed the fragile alliance with my father, leaving the Irish and Italian syndicates on the brink of an all-out street war. Gabriel didn't care about the territory anymore. He didn't care about Senator Arthur Mitchell's threats to bring down the feds. He cared only about the gaping void I had left behind. He hired a private contractor, a former intelligence operative named Victor, to hunt me down. For months, I had been brilliant. I used cash. I didn't drive. I didn't use the internet for anything personal. But my one mistake was human connection. I had called Maria one last time in late January to make sure she was safe from the fallout. It was a 2-minute call on a prepaid phone, bounced off 3 different towers. But for a man with Gabriel's infinite, bloody resources, a 2-minute window was all it took. Victor traced the cellular ping to a 50-mile radius in Knox County, Maine. The storm hit on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky over Camden had turned a bruised, violent purple, and the snow was falling so heavily it blanketed the town in a deafening silence. Martha had gone home early, leaving me to close up the bakery. I was wiping down the glass display cases, humming softly to the radio, feeling a profound sense of peace. Then the bell above the door jingled. I didn't look up immediately. "I'm so sorry. We're actually closed for the storm." The words died in my throat. Standing in the doorway, bringing the freezing cold and the scent of expensive cologne and violence with him, was Gabriel. He looked terrible. The tailored Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a heavy black overcoat that hung off his suddenly gaunt frame. His face was shadowed with dark stubble, his cheekbones hollowed out. But his eyes, those terrifying dead eyes I remembered, were different. They were wide, frantic, and burning with a dark, obsessive fire. Behind him, through the frosted glass of the bakery windows, I could see the faint silhouettes of 3 black SUVs idling in the snow, blocking the quiet street. "Elizabeth," he breathed, the sound tearing out of his chest like a jagged piece of glass. My heart hammered against my ribs, a primal instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. I gripped the damp cleaning rag in my hands, forcing my spine to stiffen. I was not the terrified girl who had walked out of his estate. I was Clara now. "My name is Clara," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "And you need to leave." Gabriel stepped further into the bakery, ignoring my words. He looked around the cozy, flower-dusted room as if he had stepped onto another planet. His gaze dragged over me, taking in my messy bun, my flour-stained apron, and the thick sweater that clung to my waist and hips. 3 months, he whispered, stepping closer. 94 days. I burned half of Phoenix to the ground, looking for you. I tore my own empire apart, piece by piece. That sounds like a personal problem, Gabriel, I replied coldly. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. His jaw clenched. You took my ledger. I took my life back, I corrected him. The ledger was just my insurance policy. You belong to me. His voice dropped into that dangerous, commanding register that used to make grown men tremble. He closed the distance between us, his massive frame towering over me, trapping me against the bakery counter. He reached out, his gloved fingers trembling slightly as he brushed a stray curl from my cheek. You're my wife. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, remembering the charity gala, remembering Camilla Ross's mocking laughter, remembering his cruel, indifferent sneer. I was a contract, I said softly, throwing his own words back into his face. A bargaining chip. I don't own your heart. I don't own your time. I mean absolutely nothing to you. Remember? Gabriel looked as though I had shot him point blank in the chest. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the bakery was the howling wind rattling the window panes. Gabriel's hands dropped to his sides. The absolute certainty he usually carried himself with shattered. I was wrong, he choked out, the words seeming to physically pain him. It was a confession dragged from the depths of a dark, twisted soul. I was a monster to you, Elizabeth. I pushed you into the shadows because if I let you into the light, I would have had to admit that I felt something. In my world, feelings get you killed. In your world, I retorted, stepping out from behind the counter, refusing to let him cage me in. Everything gets you killed, but I survived it. I survived you. The door of the bakery suddenly swung open, ripping a gust of snow into the room. Wyatt stood there, brushing the snow off his shoulders. He froze when he saw Gabriel. He immediately sensed the danger radiating from the man in the black overcoat. Clara? Wyatt asked, stepping protectively forward, his eyes locked on Gabriel. Is there a problem here? Gabriel turned his head slowly. The sorrow in his eyes vanished, instantly replaced by the terrifying, lethal predator I knew too well. He reached into his coat, his hand drifting toward the holster I knew was strapped to his chest. Step outside, local, Gabriel sneered, his accent thickening with Phoenix grit. Before I paint these walls with you. Wyatt, no! I yelled, stepping sharply between them. I shoved my hands hard against Gabriel's chest. He didn't budge, but he looked down at me, surprised by my force. Don't you dare. Do you hear me? You don't get to bring your vice into my sanctuary. Wyatt looked confused, but he held his ground. Clara, who is this guy? Nobody, I said, glaring up at my husband. He's a ghost from a life that doesn't exist anymore. I turned my back on Wyatt and looked Gabriel straight in the eyes. Tell your men to stand down. Keep your hands off your weapon. If you hurt him, or anyone in this town, you lose everything. Gabriel scoffed, a bitter, hollow sound. I already lost everything. My empire is bleeding out. The feds are circling. My own men don't trust me, because I spent the last 3 months torturing anyone who breathed your name. He stepped closer, dropping his voice so only I could hear. Give me the ledger, Elizabeth. Come home. I will give you anything you want. You want me to beg? I'll beg. You want to be a queen? I'll put a crown on your head." "I don't want a crown in a kingdom of dirt," I whispered. I walked over to my coat hanging on the rack and pulled a small encrypted USB drive from the pocket. I held it up. Gabriel's eyes locked onto it like a starving dog. "The ledger isn't in a safe," I said calmly. "It's on a secure server. I set up a dead man's switch. Every Sunday at noon I have to log into an IP address and enter a sequence. If I don't, say, if I am kidnapped, forced into a car, or killed by a mafia boss who wants his property back, the server automatically forwards the entire ledger. Unredacted." Gabriel froze. "Where does it go?" he asked, his voice deathly quiet. "Everywhere," I smiled, a genuine, powerful smile. "It goes to the FBI field office in Phoenix. It goes to Senator Mitchell's political rivals. And most importantly, it goes to the cartel factions you've been skimming from on the southern border. If I don't enter that code, Gabriel, you don't just go to prison. You get hunted. Lorenzo, your capos, your whole family, burned to the ground." Gabriel stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time. He didn't see the fat, quiet, invisible wife he had ignored. He saw a strategist. He saw a queen who didn't need him to put a crown on her head. She had forged one out of his own hubris. "You're bluffing," he whispered. "Try me," I challenged. "Drag me to that SUV. Let's see what happens on Sunday." He stood there, the weight of his collapsing world crashing down onto his shoulders. He had come here to conquer, to drag his runaway bride back by the hair if he had to. Instead, he found himself standing in a quaint bakery, entirely at the mercy of a woman he had underestimated. Slowly, agonizingly, Gabriel dropped to his knees. The thud of his kneecaps hitting the hardwood floor echoed in the quiet room. Wyatt gasped softly in the background, but I didn't take my eyes off Gabriel. The boss of Phoenix, the man who made politicians sweat and killers tremble, was kneeling in the flour and powdered sugar, looking up at the soft, thick curves of the woman he had thrown away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. A single tear broke free, tracking through the dust on his hollow cheek. "I am so goddamn sorry, Elizabeth. Please. Just, please." I looked down at him. A part of me, the broken girl who had stood in that cold study 3 years ago, wanted to reach out and touch his hair. She wanted to believe that this broken, desperate man could be fixed, that his toxic, obsessive love could be molded into something beautiful. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I loved my soft body. I loved my flower-stained hands. I loved my peaceful life. "Apology accepted," I said softly. I placed the encrypted USB drive on the counter next to his head. "That has the decryption key for your accounts. You can save your empire. You can go back to Phoenix, pay off the cartel, and fix what you broke." He looked at the drive, then up at me, confusion mingling with his despair. "The dead man's switch? It stays active," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "You go back to Phoenix, Gabriel. You run your empire, and you leave me alone. If you ever send Victor, or any of your men, near me again, if you ever threaten Wyatt, or Martha, or my father, I will let the timer run out, and I will watch you burn from afar." He reached out, his hand wrapping around my ankle, desperate for contact. "I can't live without you. I tore the city apart." "Then rebuild it," I said, stepping back, forcing his hand to fall away. "But you will do it without me." I walked over to the door and opened it, letting the freezing Maine blizzard whip into the room. "Get out, Gabriel." He stayed on his knees for a long time. Then slowly, with the agonizing stiffness of an old man, he stood. He took the USB drive from the counter, his hand shaking. He didn't say another word. He didn't have to. The defeat radiating from him was louder than a gunshot. He walked out into the snow, climbing into the back of the lead SUV. As the taillights fade into the whiteout conditions, I closed the door, shutting out the storm. Wyatt was staring at me, wide-eyed and silent. I walked behind the counter, picked up my cleaning rag, and wiped the melted snow from the floor. I was fat. I was beautiful. I was a baker in a small town. And I was the most dangerous woman in the world. If this story of Elizabeth finding her power and bringing a toxic mafia boss to his knees kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense, dramatic stories. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that they are powerful, beautiful, and absolutely unstoppable. Hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the tea. See you in the next video.